Okay, so on this one, I'm gonna, I don't know, I've been pulled multiple times now over the last little bit, and I just haven't gotten around to actually doing this video, but I have felt this pull to start talking a little bit more about like 5D and 3D spaces, I guess, or densities, if you want to call them. And I think it's more or less because a lot of that language has come up obviously over the last little while. Last few years, especially last 5, 6 years, it just seems to be like this thing that is becoming more talked about, which for good reason. I mean, that's exactly sort of where our ascension process is taking us, right? We're going from 3D density into the 5D density again. And I do say again, because we have been there before on Earth. We had ancient civilizations, obviously, that were here, as many of us know, and of course, they were not of full 3D. They were definitely of the 5D because of their connections and their understanding and their technologies. And a lot of people want to say, oh, that only just came from, quote unquote, from the stories of star people or, the beings that came to help us here. And yeah, of course, part of that came from that, but there was still a race of human beings at that point living on this earth that had been genetically modified or whatever you wish to have your belief systems lie around, that's totally fine. I mean, again, I'm not here to tell you there's one right way or one story. We all know at a soul level, and so it's not important to certain degrees, I think, that we argue over what is real here as humans, because we already know at a soul level what is very real and what is, that actual history that often did happen that just hasn't been written in our books from our human perspective of things, which is totally okay too. I mean, that's just the way things have worked out, and that's the reality of stuff sometimes. Um, in this particular reality, I should say, because that's a whole nother topic as well. But so, where we are in our times right now, I think it's just been so hard for a lot of us to understand, like, what the hell is even the difference between 3D and 5D? Because 5D, you are still like of a physical being. It's not necessarily your physicality is necessarily changing to great depths. Um, but what mostly changes is the consciousness state. And so when we're conscious, our consciousness is changing and ascending, and we're integrating that into our physical self. What then becomes is more expansive awareness, more expansive ways of communication. Um, what people want to call as gifts, whether that be telepathy, uh, there's so many different things, and it's so funny because like I feel like I can't keep up with what they're trying to show me and then like talking at the same time. But telepathy is actually very normal space, especially in 5D. That's why a lot of the times a lot of people, if you've ever met like your guides or, different beings in your meditations, they often are not speaking outright to you because they don't need to. Us as human, because we kind of forgot who we were and how we could do things necessarily. That was part of that 3D reality. And so we needed a voice. We needed to be able to use a voice to actually communicate with other human beings. And so for us, our voice became that telepathy, quote unquote, way of communication. But this is also why a lot of people are like, oh my God, I was just thinking that, and you just happen to say it out loud type of feeling, because you are slightly picking up on things that are already in the collective consciousness. So it's actually a very natural part of what we can do, but it was just so how do you even put it? Like, I don't want to say it was taken from us, but like, because it wasn't, but I guess the way that we were shaped in our thinking and the way that we were shaped in a mindset and what we were kind of allowed to believe in, right? I mean, society started to shape all of that even from a long time ago. So we didn't really think to question, naturally kind of question, if that's sort of how the DNA and the generations were running. When they were coming into this world, that was already sort of what was being passed down. So why would so many people kind of question and being like, oh, is this like our natural way of communicating? I mean, of course, you're going to get the few that were meant to question that, to meant to look into that and see, discover, for themselves and maybe bring that forward. But for majority of people, it's very hard to accept the fact that there's these different ways of communication that are actually really natural to us because it just has not been a part of our world for so long now. So as we're moving in the energies now, and these things are starting to reawaken in us, okay, this is not a learning curve. This is a waking up. This is your cells waking up. This is your DNA waking up to certain degrees. There's so much talk about like that junk DNA that they've always said. Scientists have said, or biologists have said in our DNAs, they never really truly knew what it was for. They just called it junk DNA. It kind of just was there in your DNA strands. And for me, being a kid, I was always like, what? It just never made sense to me that that could be junk, because it didn't. I mean, I was a biology freak when I was in school. I loved it. And you'd look at plants and you would look at other beings and other things that lived on this earth, and they didn't have junk DNA, and it just didn't make any sense to me that this could be a thing. I was like, how does everybody else have this incredibly beautiful DNA, quote unquote, that doesn't seem to have any quote unquote junk in it? And yet at the same time, here's our DNA that they're saying we have junk DNA. It just didn't make any sense to me, right? So I was constantly questioning things. But I found it kind of hard because, like, nobody seemed to have any real answers. And that made it, I think, more difficult for me because I just felt like there was something always sort of being left out. And I just, eventually you get no answers, not at all, right? Or any kind of different perspective necessarily. And so eventually I just sort of thought, okay, well, I guess I just have to kind of accept that this is what it is because I just was unable to, really put the puzzle pieces together. And I think that's part of where my frustration came from, though, when I was younger, because I didn't have a lot of answers at all. I just kept coming out with more and more and more questions, and that got to be a little frustrating after a while. But eventually, again, trying to know that, okay, well, these people teaching me are the ones that know best, right? Or they're the scientists, or they're all these things. And so eventually I just started trying to convince myself to stop asking all these questions because it wasn't getting me anywhere anyway. So then as I move on through my own journey and I start to do more meditation, well, now all of a sudden I'm finding all these different answers that I've been kind of searching for even when I was a kid. So again, though, for me, it was finding what resonated the most as my own truth. Okay. I always will always encourage everybody to find your own truth. I am not here to tell you that there's one way over another because that is just not the way things work. Especially being human, you are here in your own journey, and it is important for you to have your own truth. And if that truth changes day by day, that's okay too. But it's not to confuse yourself with trying to find the one main truth because you already know what's true for your soul. At a soul being level, we have all had different experiences and different lives in different places, and which has garnered a very beautiful picture for ourselves of what we do believe is true. But we are still an individualistic soul with all sorts of different experiences. Okay. So even when it comes to earthly things, all right. But this is where maybe some people are like, well, there is a lot of truth that I've heard about, 3D or 5D, and a lot of us do resonate with that. And that's great. But you will still find certain people or souls and being like, yeah, I don't know, I just see it a little differently. And that's okay. Okay. That just comes back down to and again, just the journeys and the experiences that that soul may have had. Okay. But we do remember and we do know at a higher level, when we all come back together as one, we do recognize and see, they're not differences. They're just simply ways and experiences that to us as human, we'd want to say as differences, but it's not. Okay. So that's a much higher level of all that. But at the same time, when you come back to the 3D aspect of where we are right now, or well, I mean, here's also something really kind of interesting that I thought came through in a meditation one day. I was sitting there and eventually, it was, I don't even know what it was totally about. I just remember this kind of being a little bit like a 180 from what I was kind of focusing on at that point in time in that meditation. And my team just comes through and they said, we want to tell you something kind of interesting that we think you guys would find rather fascinating for you being human on Earth right now. So us being here on Earth in this exact moment, as you're listening to this even if you looked about 300 to 350 years ago, they would not be able to see us. That version of human, our human selves, would not be able to see us as human today. Why? Because we're too bright. We literally would not look like humans to them. They would probably just see us more as bright lights than they would see us as, eye to eye, human to human. So we can see them because they're of a lower vibrational state of being, right? But that's how, and we'll start to kind of explain a little bit more now too, the 3D, 5D kind of sensations, where in 3D, of course, like as we're moving closer to 5D, there's the 4D in between there, but the 4D has always been a part of us, which is our consciousness state of being. And so it's not physical, it's that imaginative or the creative space of thought. And that where creation literally comes from, like where a lot of people are like, I don't know where the idea came from, it just kind of hit me. That's the fourth D. Okay, so it's a space, sort of, it is a dimension and a density of its own, right? Sure, yep, absolutely, but it's mainly just pure energy. Okay, so with that, that's always been a part of us. That's, but we don't always know how to access that fully. Okay, so it's the 3D. We didn't always know how to access more fully into the fourth D of the expansion of, what could be created there. And so then the 5D is more of that integration between 4D and 3D into an ascension of 5D, but that's also more galactically connected. Okay, so galactically connected people, or consciousness levels are now sort of telepathy, basis communication happening with some of those energies and some of those beings outside of our Earth. Okay. Also on the Earth, though, too. So this is how people are like, oh my God, I swear to God, I just happen to know what that animal was thinking. Or I'm pretty sure the trees, are like giving me stories. I had this happen to me. It was super cool. The first time it ever happened to me, I actually thought I was like, whoa, am I just seeing things? Am I just making this up sort of feeling? Because that's, of course, where my brain automatically wants to go when you're not used to having those experiences. But as my mentor was telling me, she's like, oh no, that's very real. The trees have lots to show you. They'll show you lots. And they all have their own individual songs. And like I was hearing these songs and these beats, and every time I would connect with the trees. And it became really interesting, right? And as much as people want to say, oh, that's crazy, or that might sound crazy, whatever. That's fine. They're allowed to choose that as their truth if that's what they want to continue to believe in, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not offended if somebody wants to call me crazy because I like to talk to the trees and, have these experiences in this way because it's so expansive and it just makes life so much more interesting when it's not just us anymore, and our problems and all these things. So that's part of where the 5D is lying, where we're more interconnected at a consciousness level into our physical self. Now, before things went wild on Earth. I mean, we've had some wild moments on Earth. Let's face it. I mean, even in ancient times and things, I mean, this is the heaviest, densest duality, right? So we've got 50-50 here. And so you never really know which way the pendulum's always going to swing. And of course, it's happened in the past too. And before that, though, before things really took a turn and locked into 3D. Okay, there was a point in time where things locked into 3D, and it does have things to do with our moon. There was definitely technology put into our moon. If you don't know for sure or not, please do some more meditation on the moon. For me, I have always recognized that the moon was not natural, that it seemed to be very intentionally placed there for some reason. And obviously, that was actually to help with life on Earth, because we do know the moon has a lot of, gravity pull. You look at the tides of our oceans, that's all to do with the moon. And so there was very intentional things about our moon being put there so that our Earth could have and create life in a physical sense, and a lot of different kinds. Obviously, we know like we have the most intense amount of life probably on Earth in so many different aspects and so many different things, including, the oceans to to the lands, to the humans, to the animals, to the bugs. There's so much life here. Plants even, look at the variety of plants just in even certain little areas on Earth. It's just insane, right? So like there's so much life that can live here. But to make that viable, we needed something to help the Earth to be able to create that environment so that so many different things could actually survive here, because our planet also has, those intense temperature changes depending on where you are, right? So there had to be something that helped us out a little bit that would create a space that life could actually thrive. And that's sort of why the moon was brought and put in place. Now, the moon also, many stories about the moon. Maybe we'll do another podcast on sort of some of the things that I have heard, some of the stories, some of the things that I've resonated well with. I've always found the moon fascinating. Again, just because the energy of it always felt very different to me, but beautifully intentional, right? Again, just that beautifully intentional thing. So with the moon, there was a technology put on our moon at one point in time, quite a long time ago. Like we're talking ancient, ancient civilizations. Okay, so probably over 12,000 years ago, sort of what they're talking about here. Um, from the numbers, if we want to sort of put numbers on it, 12,000 years ago, there was a technology put on the moon to sort of walk Earth into a 3D state. Okay, so the most natural state in the galaxies is 5D. So when something comes into creation, let's say it's a new star or a new planet or new life somewhere, it's almost automatically always starts at 5D. Okay, so that's the natural sort of where things at a physical state are going to start is going to be in the 5D, not 3D. 3D was something that we either intentionally move towards depending on, what it is. So let's say it's a new star, it's a new planet, it's a new, dimension or parallel dimension or whatever you want to see it as. Um, if that's being created, it's going to start off in that 5D space. And from there, whatever's going on, whatever's kind of decided upon at that collective level, or whatever beings, or whatever energies, or whatever that experience is supposed to be, then we'll sort of choose if they're going to go, you know, more physical, more dense, or if they're going to just choose to ascend from that point, which don't get me wrong, most places choose to ascend from the 5D. We're one of the only places in our little part of the universe over here that has actually gone 3D, but then things happened here that were actually we were locked in to 3D. Okay, so we couldn't actually get past being 3D at that point. So this is why some people are like, "Oh man," it was just like you look at some of the stuff that happened, from humanity level. Like, see, like we're even talking, back in Roman times and all those things, and like the wars and the death and like all this such dense, dark stuff was happening, right? And it still makes sense to me why though, because one, our duality was definitely still being played out, right? So we're having the pendulum swing, absolutely, okay? But we're locked into 3D. It's not the space where people could easily change their vibration even of themselves. Like that took so much work. And for you to do that and then be constantly sort of beat back down from the collective level, it would just be so hard to continue to try and really raise yourself up into this different state of being unless you had a group of people around you that were doing the same thing. But that was pretty minimal, or it was kind of happening, underground, right? Because they didn't want everybody else to know because you could be killed for it back then. Because again, eventually we got to the times where patriarchal systems were so dense and so taken over that point. Like if you tried to do any of that, I mean, you were just totally taken out of your life anyway. So it was so dense, so dense. Like the 3D is dense, don't get me wrong, I get that. And the duality feels harsher in 3D because we don't have the same sensations and the same connections at a consciousness level to be able to transmute and understand choosing our own truth, taking back our power, and not feeling the need to have to consistently follow what's being put out in front of us, right? And then we start to understand like we create our reality that way. But for you to truly create a reality for yourself, you need to be able to access that part of self, that awareness. And they just like we couldn't do that all those times ago. So it's just been this space where we're learning how to transcend past that. Obviously, we're at that point now. Like we are well on our way into being going towards the 5D. Hence why you're hearing more about disclosure and hearing about all these things and this galactic piece starting to come back into play here because that's exactly what's happening. And we need it to happen that way if we want to move out of this. But here's the thing. So here I've told you about 12,000 years ago, that technology was put on our moon to lock Earth into 3D. Now, that's a whole nother story. Okay. There's a lot of details that come along with what I have learned, what I've heard from other bits and pieces and started put a picture together. But what's happening is that technology is failing now. So with that technology failing, it's allowing our Earth to come back up into a 5D state. So it is failing in itself to certain degrees. So it's loosening the grip on the 3D. And that's mainly what's been happening, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. It is loosening. It is allowing for us to start to recognize. And that's why they're calling it the Great Awakening right now, because so many people are starting to have this understanding of like, maybe I need to start questioning some things. Maybe this doesn't quite feel like, totally true for me. Maybe I have been living in a bit of a zombie mode for a lot of my life, and I'm really starting to recognize like, I don't even like these things that I'm doing. I was just doing them because I thought that was success. Like, welcome to the club. I've been there. So, it's just this space where people are having more time to really start feeling again and start questioning. But the hardest part for some is like when they start to recognize maybe that they've sort of adopted beliefs that really didn't resonate, or they feel like they've been lied to. Um, that can cause like a whole nother dynamic to happen, right? But that's a part of the awakening process. It's not always going to be, rainbows and sunshine. And we do have to sort of face our shadows of what has happened as well, in this incredibly intense space we call Earth that we live on right now. So the dimensions, real quick here. Now, everybody kind of wants to think of them as a ladder, which makes sense to us as human, which I understand. But it's more of like the easiest way I think I was able to sort of being shown it to make sense was that so 3D is the densest 3D is the densest space. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I just had to get this realigned in my own head again. So 3D is a dead space, like we're physical, right? But for we can't, we're already connected to the fourth. But there is energies and entities that live in fourth dimension. Okay, that's definitely a part of our duality. That's where some people want to say, oh, well, that's the scary stuff. That's where a lot of, the fear or the things that can be kind of used against our own psyche in a way. And so if you give your power to them and think they are more powerful, then absolutely they will you'll feel like they are, but they aren't. They aren't. They want you to believe that because that's how they feed off energy, right? They're energy beings, remembering fourth dimension's only energy. They can't harm you unless you choose to give your power to them. So, and again, that's only going to come a harm as a mental sense. They can't physically harm you. It is only going to come as a mental sense, okay? So we'll maybe go into another podcast episode about maybe a little bit more of that because it is pretty, I don't know, it can be a little bit touchy, I guess, but at the same time, I think I would love to give my perspective of understanding that now because I have wanted to get different outlooks and understand a little bit more, especially of the fourth dimension now. Anyway, so we're naturally connected to the fourth. That's why we can have flits of being like, oh my God, did I see something out of the corner of my eye? What the heck happened there? So you're seeing energy in that space. So, but then when we move into 5D, so 5D can see four and three, but four can't see five. Okay. So that's sort of how it works. And that's why three can't usually see five either. That's why we feel like it's sort of if it's not like a physical sense, it's not real. Um, and then you go up from there, right? So six can see five, four, three. And can't see seven though. Six can't see seven. Seven can see everything below and is partially sort of connected to eight. It goes up to 12, right? So, but I mean 12 is super, super, super high frequency. I mean, you're complete energy at that point. You can have more physical beings right up into what they've shown me, right up into even seven, but they're not as physical as we are, and they never would be. It's more of like a state of mind where they can sort of project and pull themselves into being more physical and then kind of release back into more energy. So it's very hard to understand at a physical level, but it is a capability. 5D is definitely still usually a lot more physical. Like they don't really usually have capabilities of making themselves less physical, hence why that's where we're headed. But they have a lot of technology that allows them to travel and do things. Get to other places and do that kind of stuff without being so linear, I guess, in the movement of that. And that's maybe why some people think 5D is not totally physical, because they do have this sense in these technologies that allow for this disillusion sort of the physical self and then being able to move in different ways. But it's not them doing that. Like they are still physical beings, and so they still, if they came here for the most part, most of them would need something of a suit like we would have as astronauts because they still need an environment that's going to allow their physical self to, function. But they do have a lot of technologies that help do a lot of that kind of stuff, right? So uh, there's so much that I could continue to go on with this, but I'm gonna just leave it at this and in for this one because it is very fascinating and it is very interesting when you start to really find your truth within all of this and just allowing it to be this really expansive thing instead of like this really like, oh my God, really overwhelming thing because it can be overwhelming if you want it to be, but that's just our logical mind trying to put it in human sense. Once you sort of let that go and you start to find, oh, that's like just hitting me, that makes sense, right? And don't let your brain try to make sense of it, then it becomes a lot less overwhelming. And then you start to just sort of find your truth in it. So, anyway, I hope that helps you in some ways, gives you some different perspectives. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.